Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 7th Working Group Component Standard meeting. We don't have much on our agenda today, but Lubomir is going to talk about flag overrides. Take it away.
Yeah, so I started drafting some code basically about how we can enable basically versioned component configs or GVKs, to be able to be overwritten from the command line. And we briefly discussed this last time, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I drafted something without Cobra even. I just used the native standard library flags. And I was able to get something working basically in a couple of hours. The whole code ended up being something like 200 lines. But there are some questions, like we posed the same questions last time. Like how do we override a specific version of a config using these flags? So I mean, I should probably share a screen or something. But basically, what I did is that when you type dash dash help, you get the flags that are not related to config. But when you type dash dash help dash config, you can basically get the list of flags that override the config fields. And the fields can be bound to a specific version of an API. So the way to do it, the way to override certain flag, for instance, in the kubelet, you can type dash dash kubelet config dot the version of the API
Mm-hmm.
dot the field, for instance, mm, cgroup driver or something.
Yeah. I almost wonder if it would be easier to just have one flag that takes like a JSON string as a piecemeal.
Like a patch.
Yeah. And you could just set the GVK in that.
Hmm.
And if there's a mismatch between that patch and say the actual config file in terms of version, we can figure out either how to resolve it with conversion or just reject it.
Hmm. But the patch itself still has to include the GVK of the object you want to modify. And basically, this is entering the land of customize at this point.
Yeah, that's true. Um, I think it's probably better to include the GVK
Uh-huh.
so that people have to be explicit about what they're trying to do.
So from the kubeadm use cases that I've seen, that people don't care about the config. They want to modify a couple of flags. So basically they want the use case that I'm trying to implement. But they also want the
That's
customized
kind of
one.
like an old mindset, though, right? So I don't know how much we should encourage people to regress to the way things have been done before.
The only thing is, like, if you don't have a right access to a file system, or you're using a shell, I mean, I can see if you've got config management, but it you've got to like teach people Bash, you know, um, like some weird features like here docs in order to do inline config. Like, do we have the ability to pass a config as a string?
So that's something we could think about is like a flag that just takes a JSON string as one possible option. Um, I mean, that said, it's not that hard to open an editor in a shell window and paste a file into it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about people like bridging the gap and when they're writing that, provision.sh. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be worth understanding, what workflows different people have that they're struggling with. I guess in my workflows, I haven't so much have those problems. I usually edit things locally. And when I, on my own machine, I do have access to the file system and then push it to Git, and automation takes it from there. Or, you know, you just edit it locally and push it right to an API server. So I guess I don't have that problem. So it's worth understanding who does and why.
Yeah, the audience for KubeADM is mostly not going to be software developers, and it's going to be people who've been in traditional ops roles. So very different perspective.
Sure. But even in that role, right, like what's the workflow that they don't have access to the file system where they need to edit the config, right?
I would think that some of that would probably be solved through maybe a string flag, but also just some docs. Maybe. Lubomir, do you think people are relying on flags because they don't want the inconvenience, or just don't know how to use a config file?
They don't know what the config file even does, and they haven't read the docs, and they want to create a cluster, and they just, they pass the pod subnetwork as a flag, and that's it. But this faces the problem where we have to maintain this flag, as part of the COI, the COBRA interface. And this is not only a problem in KubeADM, it's everywhere. It's also in the test framework. So basically, I was thinking of a way for a generic, basically a generic way to expose whatever config we have. But I guess the point you made about Bash, we can feed the config as a stream. This allows us to basically have the config without writing it to the file system. But the problem is that this is not portable to Windows, because Windows does not support this type of pipes. And we either have to write the file to disk, or we have to basically support flags directly. So there are use cases, but the only real reason to add this is because people cannot write to disk. That's the only real problem.
Yeah, I want to understand why they can't write to disk. In the context of their workflow, right? Like, is it because they're actually SSH'd into a machine and they're trying to mess with it on a one by one basis? Because that's not what Kubernetes is about, right?
I mean, a lot of people just like to work with a single binary, and if you're trying to install KubeADM on CoreOS, you even have to figure out where to put the binary. And then if they can't figure out how to override where the config file is read from, then that can be frustrating.
Yeah, but that's a flag. That's actually a flag, right? That's -- config.
Yes.
And that's all it should be. So that shouldn't be too hard for
That's the only things I can really think of. Yeah. I mean, overriding the config to come from standard in, and then piping cat to it from a shell, and then wrapping that in signal handling, I guess. You could get creative, but
yeah.
I mean, the other reason is people are, like we discussed with it, people are lazy. They don't want to understand what the company config is about. They just want to use a single flag. And if we don't want to maintain the separate set of flags because of these lazy users, we basically have to have this mechanic where we, copy the fields. That basically I'm proposing, to copy the fields into flags automatically.
Yeah, I mean, it's also worth considering. Think about how much easier a Docker image is to use from flags versus configs.
It's also a lot more
when you're actually trying to run the process as pip, and you have to mess with the mount namespace and use volumes or something in order to get a config map in there. But yeah, so those are reasons, I think, why people would be incentivized. I'm interested in the POC you've written, since it sounds like it's a pretty small amount of code.
Yeah, I want to see the proof of concept, and if you really want to pursue this, I think it'd be good to write a KEP with the actual cases where people's workflows don't
I
match up with the config
I
file.
think it's like
We just have
really
to we have to really justify the complexity of continuing to have both sources.
my my instinct is that it's like very thoughtful to be thinking about like versioning and docs and that kind of thing. But honestly, if like the flags were best effort and they were just like parsed a dot notation string or took like a JSON patch and then it did that to the config object before like decoding it, then that sounds pretty nice to me.
Yeah, it's the convenience versus robustness.
I mean, like what kind of type safety are you really going to get? You know?
Well, it's not. I mean, it's one of those things where as soon as you say it's best effort going forward, then there's a chance that something's going to happen. It's not clear what, but there are different. I can already see different things, right? Like, okay, well now config is coming from two places. Are there two people responsible for it? Is the person changing the flags aware of what's in the file if they're not even bothering to learn about what's in the file? There are plenty of config fields that are interrelated. So if you're changing one, you should know about the others, right? So that could be a source of production issues. If you're just, blanket overlaying strings in this thing before you decode it, maybe it's easier to break the decoding. I don't know. Again, there's the version resolving. What version of the API were you targeting? So I think it's just, if the only problem is that people are unfamiliar with the config file and haven't been able to adapt to that yet, I think it's too early to say that that's a real problem, because most things, the config files have only been like alpha or maybe beta without full coverage of the config. So it's almost like you can't really have expected somebody to change their workflow yet because it's not ready yet. And I think it would still be better if people could change their workflow to focus on the config files, right? That's more in line with the overall Kubernetes cluster management paradigm.
Yeah, basically that's what I'm suggesting to users all the time. Like we don't have a flag in kubeadm for something. I say this is already available in the config. But one of the main people who has been pushing this like a generic question in the Kubernetes space is Tim Sinclair, who is basically asking when is the component standard working group is going to start working on the flag overrides. And I realized that probably only Lucas knows about this.
Yeah, I don't know what they've talked about.
Yeah. So it's kind of in a weird space. Like, do we even need this? Like you're saying that people should really use the config instead of these flags. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to draft some code, probably write a Google Doc about this, and show you guys maybe next time or the week after what I have. And if you agree with this, we can proceed with a KEP or hold it in case the idea is not very good. Maybe I can invite Tim as well to join to outline the whole problem, because according to him, it's a generic problem in Kubernetes and it's not like only kubeadm.
Yeah, I mean, we should totally talk about that. That's maybe a SIG Arch discussion too, right? Because they're basically two distinct or significantly different philosophies on how to manage data.
Yeah, because I have one example with the kubelet, for instance. The kubelet has, I don't know how many flags, like more than 100 or something.
Yeah, it's like 120 or something like that.
Yeah, so we have the basically the versioned API. So if we at some point removes all the flags, we can expose the whole API via flags. But again, it's like, should we do it? Shouldn't users instead just use the config?
Yeah, and the other thing too is you almost have to get, especially if you're going to change the flag format to do it cleanly, you almost have to get all the way off of flags first, so you don't have any risk of interference from pre-existing things.
Yeah, it's a complicated topic. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to proceed with my proposal. That's all I wanted to discuss about this.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That'll be useful. I think this is going to be a good discussion for everybody.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Lady, do you have anything else?
No, I just finished up some stuff for the add-ons sub-project, so I'm going to be looking at some rebases today. And yeah, that's all.
Cool. I don't have anything, so thanks, guys.
Oh, yeah, we de-scoped the Kube Controller Manager feature for 115.
Okay.
And I think Stuart is going to start working on a KEP for that.
Awesome. Sounds good.
He just messaged me this morning. So.
Good. I'll look forward to that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'll put that down in the notes. And that's all.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good Tuesday.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye, Lumir.